Hi guys, I'm Phil, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the DJI Go4 app. So, let's go to the video. So we are just starting up the DJI Go4 app, and this is what you will see. It's doing a version check just to make sure that I have the latest firmware, and there we go, everything is fine. So we tap Go Fly, and it brings us up to our starting screen. Now this will tell you everything about the status of the unit, and everything looks normal. As you can see, we've got the latest up-to-date firmware. And so all we do is we tap the X there, and that brings us up our main screen. So we're going to do this in three parts, and first we'll look at the general settings and how I have them set and what I think is the best settings for beginners. So the three little dots at the top of the screen, we just tap on that. And that brings us up to the general settings. And then you can see on the left hand side that there are different icons. So let's press on those one by one. And the top one, which looks like a drone, will bring us to our main settings. This will look at things like the home point settings. You can see that there are two items there. You can either set the current position as the home point, or you can set the position of the remote controller as the home point. We can't do either of those because we're indoors at the moment. Enable dynamic home point. No, I don't use that. I don't have a need for that. I just have it return to home from where it took off. And definitely not return to home at the current altitude it's at. I don't want it flying back at 10 meters and crashing into buildings or trees. So I have set my return to home altitude to 40 meters, and that will be good enough to clear trees and any obstacles should I choose to bring it home with that function. Beginner mode, a very good idea if you are a beginner to fly a couple of times in beginner mode. What that does is that it restricts the distance you can fly to, 30 meters high and 30 meters distance. And that means that you can practice without any fear of it flying away, and you can see it and you'll have an idea which way it's facing, etc. However, after a couple of batteries, you'll be wanting to turn off beginner mode. And of course there is legal maximum altitude, and I have set mine to the exact legal altitude of 120 meters. A distance limit I have switched on, and I've set my distance limit to 2,000 meters. Probably more than I will ever need. But as a beginner, maybe you could even cut that down to maybe somewhere between 300 and 500. At the bottom, you can see that there are some advanced settings, and for the Spark, you just have the sensor state. You can check the IMU and see whether that needs calibrating, and it's in excellent condition at the moment. If I press compass, we're probably going to see that there's compass errors. Well, actually, it's not too bad considering it's sitting right next to my computer. So that's not bad at all. So if we then go back and we can look at the navigation settings, I have all of these just turned on. Enable obstacle avoidance, enable backward flying and active track, enable advanced gesture control, and allow indoor away and follow. I have all of those set on, but you may want to turn one or two off depending on your preference. We can now go to the remote controller calibration menu. If you want to calibrate the controller, that's what you will do. I don't need to do that at the moment. And then we can change the stick mode. The default mode is mode 2, but some people prefer to use mode 1, especially if they are gamers and used to working with the game pads that they have for their games. Personally, best to learn on mode 2, as most drones function in mode 2. Then we have maximum flight speed settings, which I have set to maximum. And if you watched the video on the remote controller, you'll remember that there were 2 function buttons. The first function button you can see I have set to camera forward and down. As you'll see later, that's because I have the gimbal speed set very low. If I do want to quickly move the camera from its up to its down position, I can then just click that function button and the camera will move up and down very quickly. You can set it to what you like. You could set it to bringing up battery information, or set it to FPV or follow mode. It's really is up to you what you choose. And also the second function button, I simply have that set to bringing up my camera settings, so that I can change my camera settings quite quickly if I need to. And then you have a remote controller linking function at the bottom. Moving on to the Wi-Fi, as you can see, my Wi-Fi is not very good at the moment, and that's because I'm indoors. But here you can see this is your Wi-Fi identification and password, and the password you can change should you desire from the default password. You can also custom your Wi-Fi, but I would say just leave it to auto and let the Spark decide which is the best Wi-Fi band for you. Underneath that, you'll see the battery function, and that will give you a readout of how your batteries are doing. And as you can see, everything looks fairly normal. I have my low battery warning set to 20%. Some people have it set to 30%, but since I don't tend to fly it more than 500, 600 meters, then 20% is perfectly adequate to get the machine home without any damage. And details of the batteries, you can bring up the serial number, and you can see this particular battery has been charged 25 times. And that brings us finally to the bottom one, which is the gimbal settings. And so as you can see, I've got the gimbal mode set for follow mode. I'm not into FPV, so I don't need it set to MPV. But the interesting one is the gimbal pitch speed, which I have set at 10. I think the default is nearer to 50, but I like to have the gimbal pitch at a slower speed, so that any shots that I'm doing that involve the camera moving up and down are a bit smoother. And that's why I then have the function button set to quickly moving the camera up and down, in case I need to move it very quickly, and I don't have to wait for it to slowly come back up or go back down. Underneath that, you have a gimbal adjustment, and unless there's a problem, I don't really need to use that. And so that is the main menu setting. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the interface. And you can see all the details at the top. It says I'm in ATI mode. That's because I have no GPS signal because I'm indoors. And also it says I don't have any satellite coverage. The image transmission is not great, but I have good, decent Wi-Fi connection. Battery life is at 65%. If you look over to the left, you'll see 3 inputs over there. The arrow on the way up, if I click that arrow, it will basically bring up, are you sure you want to take off? This is the takeoff button. All I do is simply slide that button to the right, and the aircraft will take off and hover about 1.2 meters or so in the air, waiting for you to give it its next instruction. I don't want to do that now because I'm indoors. Underneath that button is the return to home, which, as I'm not flying at the moment, you can see is grayed out. Works the same way. If I want to return to home, click that button, the slider will pop up asking me if I want to return to home, slide it to the right, and the aircraft will return home. Underneath that is what looks like a remote controller. Click this button and it brings up all the intelligent modes. Now I will do a separate video because there's a lot of information here, and I'll do a separate video on these, so look out for that when it's uploaded. And on the right hand side, it's pretty much the camera settings. You can see it right at the top. You can see the actual settings itself, the ISO, shutter speed, and 1080 30 frames per second. The button underneath will toggle between picture mode and video mode. And the red button underneath that, or the white button in camera mode, is what will start the video or take a picture. The red button, of course, will also stop the video. And underneath that you have your settings. Now there isn't a great deal of things that you can do in the settings menu. You can change the ISO and shutter speed and change the exposure value, but it's really not a lot of things that you can do. There are some things that you can do, and I will also deal with camera settings in a different video, but I would suggest that as a beginner user, leave it mostly in auto. The only thing I would do is the white balance, and I would always have that set at cloudy or sunny, depending on what kind of day it is. So let's take that back. The on-screen display, which you saw earlier, I've always got on, and you can turn on or off the histogram so that you can check that your balance is nicely in the middle. The grid underneath, I always like to have the grid lines so that I can set a frame for my picture, and the grid lines help to do that. So I always have a basic grid switched on the interface. And the only other thing that we have is the map, and you can toggle back and forth between the map and the camera. And then finally, the last button on the right hand side is where you have all your videos that you can have a look at. I don't have anything stored at the moment, so there's not really much to see in that. Okay, so that's the DJI Go4 app. If you thought this video was helpful, then please give us a big thumbs up. Also, if you are a beginner drone user, or you are thinking about buying a drone in the near future, then please hit that subscribe button. Also, if you have any comments or suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Well, that's it for this video, so all that remains to be said is stay happy and keep flying.